book, kind of a crucial character.
Right.
So did you personally encounter any nubile young women while you were traveling around, or is she just
You
kind
know,
of
that's
necessary
funny.
to the story?
That's funny. A lot of research that's done for any book. I can't remember the writer who said it, but I heard him speak at a conference one time up here in Alaska, and he said that every book he wrote, when he described the character's house, it happened to be the house he was living in at the moment. Well, that's just the way we keep them straight in our head. So a lot of these characters, didn't necessarily think them up for the story. They're just people I've bumped up against along the way. And being a retired law enforcement officer, I got the chance to, especially in the Marshal Service, where we transport prisoners a lot. And in days gone before I moved to Alaska, a lot of times we were in sedans where it would just be my partner and I and one or two prisoners in the back, taking them up to Oklahoma or over to Oregon or wherever. And we were in the car with them for a long time. And they're people and they want to talk, and I'm a writer and I want to talk. And so I listened to them and got them to tell me their stories. And you just kind of soak that up like a sponge. So, I think I have a lot of, I've just had a lot of crime writer, thriller writer 101 and graduate level experiences, getting to meet some fascinating people and writing them down.
Well, you certainly have a very large cast in this book,
Yeah.
main players and then some more casual players. But I wanted to ask you, I was looking it up. It's so dark in here because of the lighting for the Zoom. I had to turn the flashlight out of my phone in order to see what I had done here. But when I was talking, we did that book launch for Dirk Cussler last night, and it's the first book that he's written without Clive, without any input, called The Devil's Thea. And he too has a long flight over the Himalayas, actually different than yours. And I was interested to see that both of you talk about Pratt Whitney engines.
Oh,
And
really?
I thought, okay, so our Pratt Whitney, I mean, this is a total
Common.
digression here. Are they kind of the normal engine for long haul flights?
One of them, yeah, they're a common aircraft engine, yes.
Because I always thought they were like Rolls-Royce engines, per
Yeah,
the log.
sometimes, yeah, Rolls-Royce engines, Pratt and Whitney. There's quite a few, but yeah, they're quite common.
Well, just, sort of fun. I mean, in the ordinary course of my life, I don't run across Pratt Whitney engines, and now 2 days in a row, there
That's
they
funny.
are,
That's
staring me in the
funny.
face, interestingly, early on in a book. So one of the features of the book, and I think it's something Mark loves, but I think it's, common to these kinds of books, is the enormous range of landscape. These books travel over much of the world's surface. So I have a list actually of all the countries that you visit on this book, but I should leave it to you to tell us what they are.
Well, I write about places I enjoy, places I've been, some that I haven't. But generally, even when I write about some place like the Wakhan corridor in Afghanistan, anybody that's read my work at all, I probably had, I think I've written 22 books. This would be my Marc Cameron 22nd book, my fifth uh, Clancy. But I think three of them and maybe four have had significant portions of the plot set at one end, either right on the Chinese end or right on where it goes into the bigger part of Afghanistan. Part of that comes from the fact that as a young boy and growing up and on into college, I loved books I loved Kim. Kim is one of my favorite novels ever. And I probably read it as you can tell I think Jack Ryan reads it once a year, like rereading the Bible. And reading Clancy's Jack Ryan, I could see him being the kind of person that would read that because of just the goodness in the book and Kim himself. But that takes place in that part of Afghanistan, and that little buffer corridor that was between Russia and British India. And the whole reason that little buffer, that corridor is there, was because India and Russia didn't want to have a border. They didn't want to have a common border. And when when the United Kingdom, I don't want to say owned, but that was a Commonwealth country. They didn't want to have that as a common border. So they got together and made this little 80-mile wide strip of no man's land. And it's an interesting place because, as I say in the book, the war didn't really touch it. It has yet to touch it because it's out in the middle of nowhere. But part of the problem of being untouched by civilization is you're untouched by medication and all those things. So it gave me a good place to put they're not called Doctors Without Borders, but these doctors that have gone out to assist. And it fit the plot line of the medication thing very well. So Afghanistan, even though I've not been there, I've read The Great Game a couple of times, which is all about that area. I have a friend in Special Forces who's familiar with that helped me out. Argentina, my brother and sister-in-law are Argentine, so my wife and I have been down there. She's been down there a couple of times. So that boat trip that I talk about, where a lot of the stuff happens in the beginning of the book, out on the Tigray Delta, my wife and I have been on that and studied it. And I knew a couple of years ago that I wanted to set a big boat chase there. It just lends itself to that. So Argentina, Japan, India, and then Texas. There's just a lot of the book happens in Texas.
And Washington, right?
Oh, and I spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. and with my job. And then it's just a fun place to go. And my oldest son went to the United States Air Force Academy and then got a scholarship for his master's degree at University of Maryland. So he and his wife, when they were newlyweds, lived in Maryland, and my wife and I, and our first grandson was born there. So we would go and visit them quite often. And at that point I was still with the Marshal Service. So I would finagle, being on boards and whatnot to go back and visit the grandchild, but love that part of the country. And then of course I grew up in Texas, and I was fortunate enough I knew I wanted to set part of this in a place that was out in the middle. I didn't want them to have in the middle of nowhere. So some police department, some city, there was a thriving, up and coming, a larger city, but not a place that could get help very easy. Just like Anchorage, we have my youngest son's an Anchorage police officer, and they're kind of on their own up here. There's a 400-person sworn person department, but there's really nobody they can call for backup that could get here within, if you call for the feds, it's going to take them, a day to fly up. So Abilene fit that bill. Abilene, Texas is out in West Texas. It doesn't have any major cities by it. So I reached out to the SWAT team commander there, and they were just so welcoming. And I flew down, and they took me around and showed me all the area, introduced me to their SWAT team, and just such a welcoming group of people, and incredibly professional. I mean, I can identify a professional department and a professional SWAT team when I see it. And met the chief and the I don't know if they call him the deputy chief or assistant chief, but there's two of them actually. Just super welcoming, just absolutely folded me in among the group, and it was fascinating. So a lot of the character names and the actual places that you see, we did change the name of the mall because I don't want to make a big shooting in a real mall. I think that might be bad juju, but which is rare for a Clancy, I would say. So much of what happens geographically in a Clancy, whether it's on the Riverwalk or those places actually exist. And I walked it and figured out, I was afraid I was on camera trying to figure out that sort of nefarious act on the San Antonio Riverwalk. But we did change a bit for the active shooter in Abilene.
Well, I thought you did those scenes really well, and we can't talk about it, but the climatic scenes are really great. And you have a character called Chili that I like a lot. And it seems to me that fans also have liked Chili. So, maybe he's going to be a new part of the cast of characters.
Yeah, he's a good dude. He's a my I mentioned my son, my youngest is with the police department. He's on the SWAT team, and so I get to go and observe and watch. And so I've met these just it does my heart good as a father and a former law enforcement officer, and back in the day a former SWAT team. My son told me one time we were talking about we were in a store and I mentioned some gun and he said he kind of corrected me on it. I said, I was on a SWAT team, son. And he said, not a modern SWAT team, Dad. It's completely different now. And I know, thanks, buddy. But I do get to hang out with some stellar folks that are, I shouldn't say young people. Some of them are in their 40s that are still just really running and gunning and more than just being these tactical experts, they really care about people. They care about saving lives. Their mission is not to blast in, even though they look like it and they're dressed for, the worst case scenario. These people are, in my experience, the people that work with my son and the people at Abilene PD, they just really care about saving lives.
I was interested in what you wrote about the role of Chili's role as a sniper.
Mm-hmm.
That his role is not to just go in and shoot him up. His role is really to what? Well, you tell it. You're the one who wrote it.
Yeah, mostly. Well, I'm fortunate that my son is a sniper, and so I get to chat with him quite a bit about it and pick their brains and his cadre and the people he works with. And a sniper's role is not to go in and initiate something unless they have to save lives. It's if they go in and have to take a life, it's initiated by the bad guy. They're quote unquote bad guy. The Because when they initiate something, it starts a chain of events that often can't be stopped, and so they're very careful. It's very like I say, it's heartening to me to see the great care that they go through. Oftentimes, a sniper's job and the SWAT team in general, their job is to observe and to wait out the suspect. There, unless that suspect engages in active life taking, they would much rather set up a perimeter and wait him or her out. And so they have these really they have a lot of good trainings where that's what they do.
So this book opens actually with a scene in the air. It doesn't open with SWAT teams, and the main incident of the book doesn't come along for a while. But what we have is this kind of nice mid-30s, perfectly nice family guy who's in love with these little Cessna airplane.
Mm-hmm.
Just, I mean, it's like his dog. I mean, he's out there checking it and babying it and all of it. So it's a really interesting scene. And the first hint we have that pressure is going to be levied on people, but we don't know really on who, and we don't have any idea why. So
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
really interesting scene. Why did you decide to start the book that way?
Well, so that would be a good way for me to illustrate something apart from the more close to home things that happened to Ryan and his wife. That's a way to embarrass Ryan to if he were to shoot down a civilian aircraft. And whether it's the military that does it or whatever, Jack Ryan's going to be the one that takes the responsibility. He's that kind of a man. He's going to say the buck stops with me. So I had gone to a program called the Joint Civilian Orientation Conference through the Pentagon a couple of years ago. I was nominated after I wrote the very first Jack Ryan, Power and Empire. I had a couple of scenes in there with the Coast Guard. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be nominated by a flag officer, and I guess a Coast Guard admiral read it and liked it. And so they nominate basically people that they want to show. It could be somebody that owns a big business. It could be an author. It could be somebody to say, here is what the military is really like. Come and let us show you around. So it's like a 7-day program. The Pentagon foots the bill. You have to pay to get yourself there, but then they fly you all around the country, introduce you to folks. And it's just incredible, just and I was there with people from big major film studios, and people that are going to either hire military people or write about the military or make movies about the military. It's just a way it's like a PR thing. But the great thing about it is they didn't rehearse all the people. We drove up and went over and we talked to the rank and file. We had lunch with, Marine Corps corporals and privates and young sergeants. And so one of the things that I was able to do was go to a briefing at the Pentagon about Operation Noble Eagle. And that's what this first thing is. And with the airplane, and Operation Noble Eagle came out or was conceived after 9/11. Yeah. Here's what would happen. In fact, I mentioned in the book, it's historical, but when they didn't know, there's so much, confusion when the aircraft were hijacked that National Guard jets, they weren't armed at the time, and two National Guard jets, I can't remember the name, I think it's Sassman and Penny, might be Sass and Penny. Anyway, they took off with the intent, the plane that ended up crashing in the field, being forced down in the field, they took off with the intent of crashing their vehicles, their planes into the aircraft to keep it from hitting the White House or any other target. Pretty amazing people when you think about it, and that kind of heroism without thinking about it. Just that's what they were going to do. And so we had this briefing, and I couldn't remember who gave it to me, but I remember, and it was so fast that I couldn't take notes, but they started the briefing, they'd show something, they say, time to decide, 14 minutes. And we were, actually, it wasn't in the Pentagon. This was in NORAD, Northcom, when we had that. So we were in Colorado, and the guy giving the briefing was saying, time to decide, and this is what happens, time to decide, 12 minutes. And then he'd say, and this happens, and it's going to get a little closer, and then here, and now the time to decide, 10 minutes. And then this time to decide, 2 minutes. And, and we're in NORAD where they're having to decide, and there's some poor 2-star general in there that has to decide, all right, we're going to shoot down this civilian aircraft. And it puts them in a pretty weighty responsibility that's bequeathed to them. So through the Secretary of Defense. So I knew then when I heard that briefing, I got to put this in a book someday, but it hadn't, that was a couple of years ago, and it hadn't fit in a book, but this was the perfect time for it. So I called a friend of mine at the Pentagon with the Secretary of Defense's office. And she put me in touch with the people at NORAD, Northcom, and I ended up chatting with a man that I won't give his name now, but he's one of the people's named after him in the book. I'll say that. But so I chatted with him, and I told him, he said, well, I'm probably the one that gave that briefing. And we talked about it for a while. I took copious notes, and I said, you really know a lot about this. And he said, yep, I wrote Operation Noble Eagle. That's my project. So I was able to, I got it straight from the horse's mouth, if you will. So I love I'm proud of all the books I've written, but nobody would have at the Pentagon would have opened the doors for me for a Jericho Quinn or even Arliss Cutter. Being able to write the Clancy's has been a real boon to my writing, because now they do. Now, whether if I have some research for a Jericho or a Cutter, they say, oh, will you write the Clancy? Sure. It's been a real help, been a real door opener.
Isn't that interesting that, he's been dead for a long time, since 2013, I think it is. Yeah. And, he acquires so much celebritydom.
Well, he just wrote with such precision that, and people could read about even on that same Pentagon trip, I was on, I can't remember what vessel. I was on a helicopter landing deck. So it looks like a tiny aircraft carrier. And one of the naval officers that was there had met Tom Clancy. He was a captain, so a colonel in other services. So he'd been on a while. And when he was younger, he had met Tom Clancy, and he said he was showing Clancy one of the deck guns, and Clancy corrected him and said, no, this is where it was made and whatnot. And he was right. And so he's got a lot of, today even, he had a lot of swagger that goes with the Tom Clancy expertise.
You know, it's so interesting because he was an insurance salesman. I mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't like he served at the, you know, it wasn't like an admiral or whatever it is. He had a real passion for naval history, but, you know, and he wrote a novel and got kicked into huge fame because Ronald Reagan read his book and pronounced it. What did he say? It was like a good yarn or something.
Yeah.
But, you know, that endorsement from the president, then president, you know, kicked Tom Clancy onto the bestseller list, after which, once you're there, you have to work hard not to stay there. You know, I mean, once you get, it's so interesting. I've been talking to, you know, how many authors I talk to. This must be like, you know, we're somewhere between 500 and 600 Zoom events. So it just, you're my second of today after David Baldacci, and I have one after you with Tom Perry. And Dirk was last night, and tomorrow's Richard Paul Evans. I mean, not only are we doing Kazillion, but talk about a smorgasbord. I mean, I feel like a chameleon, you know, going from, I mean, seriously, you know, going from one kind of book, the Christmas books by Richard Paul Evans, and Whitefield by Tom Perry, and, you know, and I'm not sure.
To Evans, that's quite a leap in style.
It really is. And then I have a Victorian mystery novelist on Thursday, whose books I really like. So it helps to be a voracious reader. And I'm not entirely sure how we became kind of a focal point of political and military fiction books, but somehow or other, you know, we have. I mean, I already know what dates I have for Jack Carr. Mark Rainey is going to debut in February. You know, it's fascinating to me. And it's a little bit of a pressure for me to keep up because I know way less.
Well, I don't know. You're learning as you go. You ask good questions. And
well, thank you. I mean, I'm never going to ask you any penetrating questions about weaponry or anything. You're just not Pratt Whitney engines. I'm up for that, but there we are. But anyway, I was not a major Clancy reader because the technical parts of it, to me, outweighed the human parts of it. And I wasn't enough interested in, you know, the hardware to overcome, you know, the less exciting characters. And what I think you and the other people who've been writing the franchise have brought to it, Don Bentley now, I really loved Mike Madden's, those are both Jack Ryan Jr., right?
Right.
And so it's been who? Grant Sutherland and Mark who've written Jack Ryan Sr. But what I think you've all brought to it is a much greater depth of character. You know, this book has a lot of hardware and a lot of excitement in it, but it's really about the people. This poor little guy whose family, he thinks, and maybe it's true, have been taken hostage by some completely unknown, you know, entity. I mean, he gets a call on his cell phone, you know, do this or your wife and daughter are going to be in a picture of his wife whose car tire has been shot out by a bullet, so she can't do anything. Anyway, it's one of those pressure points where either, you know, you do this or your family dies.
Right.
And, you know, I really felt for him the whole time. He's flying his little plane towards the White House and thinking about his family. And you think, you know, what's he going to do? Is he going to, you know, is he going to try to take out the White House to save his family? In fact, is that even what he's supposed to be doing? Or is he going to sacrifice himself like the people you talked about? I think you really illustrated his dilemma so movingly.
I appreciate that. It really should be about the people. Not to keep harping on this military, but all my experiences with military commanders, and obviously they have to make very hard decisions in times of conflict. But I bet I heard over the course of that week and since then many times, people over hardware. The people are our primary asset, if you will, as military commanders. The hardware is secondary. And I believe that with the books. I think people that read a Tom Clancy novel want to know about specific tech, you know, techniques and
Right.
tech and hardware. But more than that, they want to know how that hardware is used by the people. If I'm going to write about a particular kind of jet, it's more interesting to me rather than writing about the specifics of the engine, that I know that that engine has a lot of thrust and the pilot may worry about being able to reach the ejection handles, during certain times, or, so I can talk about tech and hardware through the eyes of the person that's using it. And that's what's interesting to me. And so that's why I try to write it.
Well, I thought you balanced in that scenario there. You balanced this little guy in his little plane, sailing along, wondering what's going to happen to him. But you also did talk about the pilots of the fighter jets that were, went up to
Right.
shoot him down, and
Intercept.
about the general whose job it was going to be. You passed us along the chain of command up to the guy that's going to have to make the call. Is he, are we really going to shoot down an American citizen because he's, in space that that he's not allowed to be in, and it's looking more and more threatening and whatever. But then you also have to ask yourself, what's the guy in a little Cessna? What's he actually going to accomplish? I mean,
Yeah, and
how
that's
much damage can he do to the White House, even if he flies his plane into it? Would be,
well, a Cessna full of fuel could do a bit of damage. The interesting thing, and I'm not sure I even bring this out in the book, maybe a little bit in the mind of the air traffic controller, but this sort of thing, not to this extent, but as far as incursions, targets of interest, TOIs, happens several times a day. These are not isolated incidents. These people that are making these decisions they're faced with this a lot. And so it's pretty high intensity.
And just to be mercenary about it, you also point out that it costs the taxpayers some huge amount of money every time one of these planes is scrambled.
Right,
So I mean, it's not only a human decision, but it's a budgetary decision. If I'm really going to send these guys up there and burn up this much money, I better have a good reason for it.
That's right.
So,
Hopefully
and
it
that's
doesn't
just a
come to that.
small opening part of the book. It does get resolved. Eventually you find out what in fact was going on with this, and that was interesting too. But let's move down to Argentina. I have been there. I have been in that river delta. I have actually boated through that community, and it's kind of a version of Venice in a way.
Yeah.
In that you've got homes, and wealthy Argentinians, will have houses. They're mostly on stilts because of the tidal nature of the river and so forth. It's a massive delta. If you look at a map of Argentina, you can see that whole Rio Plata delta is enormous, like the Amazon delta, or I think it's bigger than the Mississippi delta, isn't it?
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah.
And so, if you're a tourist down there, which is what I was, you can sign up to spend a morning traveling in small boats and admiring these waterfront properties, some of which are really amazing in the whole bit. So I loved it when you have a scene there, and it's a hunt, a manhunt sort of a scene. It's a place where it really would be difficult to track somebody unobtrusively
without being seen. Right?
And I like the feint, FEINT, feint. I like the feint that the different characters, I mean, especially the prey, and so to speak, the target in this one. I like the way that you wrote the feint. So do I assume that you've actually been out on boats in the Tigre region?
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's one of my favorite places in Argentina. And my youngest son, he's always, we always talk about going down there and renting a place, and we'll probably do that at some point, and then not post COVID. That's because, like I said, we do have relatives there that sometimes come up here to visit, and then we go down there to visit. So it's
but
nice.
It didn't come into your scenario, but if I remember right, isn't the river the border between Argentina and Uruguay?
Yes.
Right. So, I mean, you could, in theory, if you really wanted to, you could have had them chase themselves over to Uruguay in another country.
Oh yeah.
That could have presented
there could be a lot of interesting stuff if you went up some of those rivers, the Paraná and it's just it's an interesting culture too. I think I mentioned it in the book that, Argentines dress like people from New York. They're I think I used the phrase in the book, they're a bunch of Italians who think they're British and living in France. They dress for dinner. They have very elegant ways about them. My sister-in-law is Argentine, but of Greek and Italian descent, and so she calls me Marc, and very elegant when she speaks perfect English, but very elegant. And my brother-in-law has polo ponies and an accountant, and well, it's just very interesting to be around the culture and the tango and the wonderful food, and the beef is everywhere. And I mean, you could get gouty arthritis just walking down the street from all the
Well,
red.
they have a whole Western, Patagonia, all that good
Oh
stuff.
yeah,
They have a whole kind of Western culture.
gaucho.
But Buenos Aires, to me, in the times I've been there, Mark, it always reminds me of Vienna. They have this
Yeah,
kind of grandiose buildings,
right. Very ornate.
a real sort of sense of empire or whatever you might call it. And I've had tea. I can't remember. There's a very elegant hotel there, which I have been to twice for
Mhm.
afternoon tea, which is very formal. I mean, it's, you dress formally, and then of course you can go down to the tango district, and now you're in, like Apache territory in
Right.
France, whatever it might be.
Right, but then right across the tracks, if you will, then you have the Villa Miseria, the slums that are
Yeah.
awful, and so
Yeah.
and they're literally are just right across the street from some of these very wealthy places. So it puts people right up against these cultures, if you will, and so it's a really neat place to set. In fact, part of the first Clancy, Power and Empire, I set in that part of Buenos Aires. It's a cool place. I enjoy the people, and
It is, and the food's remarkable. There's a really fabulous dining scene that I don't mean seen in the book. I mean, if you're there is a fabulous dining scene with a lot of restaurants to choose from and really remarkable food. But then, what's interesting to me is that Buenos Aires is so European to me. And then as you move south, you go out there through the Gaucho country and all, but as you move down to Ushuaia, which is where Chile and Argentina come together, which is, again, I've been to Ushuaia 2 or 3 times, and you can go around the Horn, and you can also go to Antarctica, which I've done.
Like Alaska. Ushuaia. Yeah, Ushuaia is a lot like Alaska.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Ushuaia is one of the most beautiful places. I mean, when you sail into Ushuaia and you look up there at those, the glaciers and the whole bit, it's absolutely. So Argentina is a remarkably varied. It's a very long, and it goes down through various, latitudes, not longitudes, latitudes, right? Latitudes. It goes down through multiple latitudes, and so you have major climate change. You've got the up at the top, it's still kind of, it's not Brazil, but it's relatively warm. And by the time you get to Ushuaia, it's as you say,
citrus groves, and they call that area Mesopotamia because of all. It's more like the Middle East and the citrus groves and whatnot. Yeah, he didn't come up with this, but my brother-in-law was quoting an Argentine saying, because I was talking about how beautiful it is and how diverse, and the Patagonias, and and the beautiful falls up north by that triple frontier region, and just so gorgeous. And he said, "Oh yes, Mark, God put the most beautiful mountains in Argentina. He put the most beautiful rivers. We have the most beautiful ocean front. We have the most beautiful women and the most beautiful horses. And then he screwed it all up by putting the Argentines here." And so I would not say that, but he's Argentine, so he could say it.
Well, but there's an additional factor, which actually is part of your book, is that Argentina, in some degree Chile, have been a place where bad people go to hide. I mean, we all, probably most people know about the Nazi prisons in both countries. But in
Nazi
this case,
presence.
you've got a really bad Serbian guy
Yeah.
who's hiding out there in the country. And I think many of us think of Argentina as a, you know, a place that it definitely has something of a fascist history, you know, given Peron and Eva Peron. In fact, if you go there as a tourist, I've always been fascinated with this. The absolute first thing they do is take you to Recoleta Cemetery and
Oh,
show
yeah.
you, you know, Eva Peron's, you know, mausoleum. But I keep thinking, why is that? You know, but actually, you'll love this. I'm really digressing here. But the first
Oh,
time
that's
we went to
great.
Buenos Aires on a cruise ship, there was a war going on. There was some kind of war going on. I can't remember. I think it was 2002. It was right after 9/11, I think.
Okay.
Can't remember. Anyway, there was a shooting war going on in Buenos Aires between whatever all was going on. So the captain comes out and says to us, it's not that big a ship, but it's a few hundred people. And he says to us, well, we're really sorry, but we're going to have to pull our stop in Buenos Aires. You know, they're shooting at each other. It's a war. We can't go in.
Oh,
And so
wow.
everybody was kind of sad because, you know, we wanted to go there at all. And so we went to bed thinking, well, bummer, you know, we're gonna miss Buenos Aires. And I don't know, maybe they'll take us to Montevideo or something. Breakfast the next morning, like 7 a.m, captain comes back on. He said, well, he said, we've told him we're not going to land and we've negotiated and they're going to call an armistice for the day. They're going to stop shooting so that we can go ashore from 9 to 5 and, you know, do all the things we planned to do, but we aren't going to get to go to the evening tango show because they want to resume fighting. It was just
Wow.
like, I could hardly believe it.
You guys saved lives just by going there.
Who
That's
knew?
amazing.
You know, so
Yeah,
there
it's
we were down there by the Pink Palace and the whole bit, you know,
right.
and all of us are wondering, are they really going to hold their fire? But apparently the tourist dollars, because Argentina has had such a up and down
Yeah,
economy,
very
the
sad.
tourist
Very
dollars
sad.
apparently outweighed whatever else was going on, and they didn't want to jeopardize the infusion of money.
No, that's very sad. I love the people. I love Argentina. They've had some rough patches as we have and a lot of countries have, but the 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 thing that I think I mentioned in the book with the dirty war and the, you know, that's a bit of a interesting bit of history, but they've gotten past that, and I just found them to be extremely welcoming and it's beautiful, and I would go back again in a second.
Well,
And
I
will.
would too, if nothing else, to go back to Torre del Paine, which they
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
share with Chile. But anyway, we're dancing around here because we can't really tell you much more about the book without completely ruining it. I'm
I
not even
know, I
sure that
know.
we
Well,
should
that
talk about the main instigating incident. But the point is that the Indian pharmaceutical billionaire, the mogul, so to speak, is determined to embarrass Jack Ryan to the point where maybe he can prevent Jack from doing this. I don't know whether the guy thinks that if he knocks Jack out of office or does whatever, that the next person up won't continue the
right.
pharmaceutical bill, but apparently that's his thinking. So he mixes it up with a professional group of bad guys, assassins. Well, maybe they are, maybe they aren't, called the Camarillo. And that's a really fascinating thing. And I love the way that you drew the characters of the guys, some of them anyway, that belong to this cadre. And so, you know, in all Clancy novels, you've got to have a good villain, right? I mean,
Right.
there's no thriller there if you don't have the campus and Jack and Mary Pat and all the rest of them facing off against evil in the world.
Right.
And you're pretty sure that they're going to triumph, but you know, there's always that slight. You could actually lose secondary characters, can't
At
you?
what
You can't kill
cost, right?
Jack, but
Exactly.
there are soldiers that can fall in this kind of a scenario, right? So that's a
Oh,
little
absolutely.
scary.
It's they're going to win, we hope, but at what cost? And the fun thing for me, and Tom Colgan and I had a lot of discussions about this early on, the editor. The fun thing for me here is making and I don't think it's given away anything about the book, but making a bit of a comparison between the Camarilla and the campus. We've
Yeah,
got
yeah,
government, or really not even officially in the government, but Jack Ryan and this off the books organization of operators that do his bidding for the good of the government, and you have a rich guy, really he's just hired them, but this kind of this shadowy Spaniard who has this group of off the books operators that are out, and sometimes their jobs are for to help a country. It's all about the money and really the fun for them of staying in the game. But being able to compare somebody that doesn't really have the greater good basically what's the difference? What's the difference in the campus and the Camarilla?
And who's defining the greater good? Because the greater good
Right.
for the US government is not necessarily the greater good for some other government,
That's
which
right.
we're seeing all the time,
Right.
currently, as we're sort of switched our Cold War to China. I talked to Dirk about that last night. At the moment, many thrillers we're back to China. We're kind of done with the Middle East, for ages. For after 9/11, every book was a Middle Eastern, bad guy thriller kind of a thing. And Russia's been a constant all the way along, but China seems to be the real focus. Brad Thor, did Dirk, Brad Thor, you, whatever. I mean, I'm learning a lot about Chinese operations. So they're the guys that have the money, have the technical expertise. They're the guys and the relentless will to be really serious opponents, right? So I don't know that you can say that the campus is morally superior. It's just they happen to align with our interests. And of course, Jack Ryan Jr. is part of the campus.
Right. So
I mean, the mission in Argentina
messy.
we're talking about is Jack Ryan Jr.
Right. So yeah, so it gets messy, and that's what makes it interesting. And the reader, can figure out. I think the fact that they're not in it for the money, they're in it for what they perceive as the greater good, not just for the joy of being able to go carry guns and jump out airplanes and do whatnot, although they are the kind of people that enjoy that, or they wouldn't be
there's
doing
a risk.
it.
Yeah, there's a risk factor addiction, a risk addiction to all of it.
Absolutely, absolutely, no doubt. And so it made for a fun bit of a comparison for me as a writer. And again, this is not delve into the psyche of these people too deep kind of a book. It should be an action move along, but it should be messy enough, in my opinion, that the readers could take a look at the characters and go, there is a toll on, not to get too deeply in it, but too deep in it, but there is a toll on Adara in this book, quite a heavy toll. So, and some of the stuff that she does. And so I think it would be flippant to make these characters who I've grown to care deeply about be able to go in and just cold-heartedly machine gun everybody and save the day. There is a certain cost that comes with that, and even if you have to take a life or lie and that sort of thing, and I wanted to explore that just a little bit. We'll still
I
have
think you
plenty
did a
of
marvelous
action.
job. I really very much enjoyed it. I mean, like with all Clancy's, it's a hefty book. It's coming up on 460 pages, whatever it might be. Because Mark is in Alaska, it's almost impossible to ship books to him and so forth. So we're just going to have to hope that he'll be able to come down and see us. So we do have copies for sale. And if and when he comes back to the Poison Pen, you can always bring your book in to get it signed. Patrick, why don't you emerge from the deep and tell us if we have questions or other things? I'm sorry, we went on too long here. So
this is fun, Barbara. Fun talking to you.
Not at all. Question is, have there been any TV or film adaptations of your Tom Clancy work? Not yet.
No, and that would be really out of my purview. When I write these, I write them for the estate. And so if they wanted to, they're their stories once I finish them. All you people out there that Hollywood people that want to do something with one of my books, you know how to find me. But as far as the Clancy's, that would be kind of a cool thing if they made a movie out of a Marc Cameron, Tom Clancy story, but that would not affect me in any other way except make me happy.
How about your own work?
Yeah, we're in talks. We're in talks all the time. Nothing nothing that I can talk about at this time, but we are moving along.
Well, the good news is Alaska has become a much more of a hotspot,
Yeah.
thanks to the greatest catch and other things. So,
Absolutely.
there's the fact that you've got a series set in Alaska is, I think, a real draw for streaming
Yeah, I think so
television
too.
because of the scenic drones. Drones have really made, great scenery spots
Oh
work
yeah,
extremely well for television.
absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Now, how do you, the technology is changing, with weaponry and things so fast all the time. How do you keep up with some of that stuff? I know you guys touched on that briefly, but
Yeah, so I do a lot of nonfiction reading. I take foreign affairs, and I listen to podcasts like Intelligence Matters and things like that. And then I have, you'll notice people that read my books notice that I'm sure that they're more law enforcement and espionage centric than they are military centric, because my background is not in the military. And so when you read a Marc Cameron Tom Clancy novel, there will be military scenes and set pieces in, because we expect that, and I enjoy doing the research on that. But the characters themselves that I tend to focus on are the ones that are Cold War-esque, that are getting the spies out, that the turn of the, somebody turning up the mole hunt, the things like that. And I am very fortunate to have several friends that are former intelligence officers, and that can talk to me now about things. And then being in the Marshal Service and talking to folks that were in, one of my dearest friends that went to the Marshal Service Academy with me. So this has been in 1991. Cell phones were very new back then. I mean, they were big bricks and came in a bag, and antennas you had to take out of your car and fold up and put on top. And the internet was just not, we didn't even know about it. And this particular deputy trainee, uh, his name happened to be right by mine in the alphabetical order, and he had a big file of tech information on cell phones. And we had, do our classes and our shooting and our scenarios and all that, and defensive tactics, but he was always reading this and underlining it. And he said, this is the future of catching bad guys. And he was right. And he went on to head up our technical operations division, came up with some incredible tech that we've used over the years to hunt fugitives with. And he's retired, as I am now, but some of it's still in use. They've built on it. And he's a dear friend of mine. We visited my wife and I visited him and his wife. And so whenever I have an idea, I'll call him and say, what does this sound? He said, nope, you're right on track, but let me lead you this way. Or, yeah, don't mention that because that's too real. And I've got a friend that's, won't want you to mention that. So you kind of intuit, I know just enough to say, I wonder if this would work. And then I can go back to them and
You have law
learn what I need
enforcement
to
people
know.
in your books. I mean, Chili, the guy that I mentioned, I can't tell you what he's doing, but
Right.
he's not a military guy.
No,
He's
nope,
a
he's a
law
SWAT guy.
enforcement.
Yeah.
In fact, I should have mentioned at the beginning that Mark rose to become chief of the Alaska district in the U.S. Marshal Service. So, a very distinguished career. Is that why you ended up in Alaska rather than Texas?
Well, I always wanted to come to Alaska. When I was a police officer in Texas, and I had applied to the North Slope Police Department, which is the whole top third of Alaska. I tried to apply to Anchorage PD and the state troopers, but back in the 80s, they would not accept you if you weren't living here already. It was a hirer's paradise. So they didn't have to take anybody unless they were Alaska residents already, but North Slope would. And so I knew I wanted to move to Alaska. I just had this draw. My wife's Canadian. She was good with it. And I'd applied with North Slope PD, and I was planning on going to Seattle to take my polygraph and all of that and start the physical. And the Marshal Service hired me. And so I ended up working in Texas and then Idaho. And then as soon as I kind of got where I could move, we transferred up here as a affectionately called a POD, a plain old deputy. I came up here as just a deputy marshal, and it was fortunate enough to promote within the District of Alaska. And we've lived here 22 years, 20 coming on 23 years, and raised our children here. Is home now.
I like your northern progression.
Yeah,
Texas going north.
Yeah, I don't think
love
my
it.
wife will go any further north. She draws the line at the
Probably
Anchorage
not.
area.
Patrick, are there any other questions or comments?
Let's see here. Somebody's asking about, do the Secret Service figure much into your books?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I have several friends that are Secret Service, and chatted with them. In fact, 3 books ago, Oath of Office, I went and spent a week with a friend of mine that was in the Secret Service at the time. He's retired now, but stayed with him and his wife in Annapolis, and he took me on a tour of Secret Service headquarters. They happened to be sponsoring a midshipman in Annapolis, and so introduced me to him. But so I've worked alongside the Secret Service many times. Marshal Service has a protective element as well, where we protect federal judges and Supreme Court justices, and then other folks that whoever the Attorney General decides, like the drug czar and different people like that. And because of our training in dignitary protection, we're often detailed to the diplomatic security, their agents for the like the United Nations General Assembly or anything, where we don't protect presidents and heads of state. That's the Secret Service. But we're protecting secretaries of state and foreign ministers, and so our details merge a lot. And so we'll be in the White House with for instance, the first time I ever went to the White House, it was the foreign minister of Japan, which would be like I think I wrote about the foreign minister of Japan in this book, but be like our Secretary of State. And so we would stand in the Rose Garden with our little detail, and the Secret Service was over here. And so we liaised with them a lot. And then I have friends that we work warrants together when they were working criminal cases. And so I've been able to base Gary Montgomery, who's the special agent in charge of the detail that runs the Presidential Protection, PPD. So he's like the primary agent that protects Jack Ryan. And that's kind of a neat dynamic, because when you have somebody like Jack Ryan that knows all his Secret Service agents by their first name, he cares about them, he's just that kind of a guy, then you have a Secret Service agent that's this big burly, boxer, football player, who really cares about protecting the president, but they really can never be friends. That would be if you're too buddy with somebody, you can't look outbound to all the threats. And so while it allows me to kind of explore that, the president remaining the commander in chief, the guy in charge, but being extra friendly, and the Secret Service agent having to navigate that. I can't be this guy's buddy, so it's fun.
Good. Well, thank you, Mark. It's really been
Thank
a
you.
fascinating time. It's sped by all too fast. So we have copies of Chain of Command, and I recommend it to you. Make a wonderful Christmas gift, because the truth is, while there's this repeating cast, you don't actually have to have read any previous Tom Clancy to love this book. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And the review I read that was so glowing was written by a woman reader. So, there's a tendency to think that only guys read books like this, but that is definitely not true. So good night, Mark. Thanks so very much.
Thanks
Bye,
for your
Patrick.
time.
In fact, I'll see you again in a couple